Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about using MIDI control curves to control various parameters within your VSL instruments to add realism and life to those instruments. It's a lot of fun, but before we do that, before we dive into it, let's recap where we've been and how we got here. So we created a score in Notion, input all the notes, and got everything just perfect according to the composition. And the score, of course, that we're looking at for this project is Robin Is to the Greenwood Gone by Percy Aldridge Granger. We assigned VSL instruments in a VE ensemble, created the VSL instruments that we needed. There's 8 instruments in this piece. We placed those on the soundstage in the correct location, correct direction, orientation that we wanted to hear it from. We assigned the appropriate microphone that we wanted to use. And then we also applied some plugins to basically sweeten or enhance the sound. Valhalla Room to sweeten the reverb tail that comes from Vienna Mir Pro. And of course, Vienna Mir Pro itself is a very nice plugin for emulating the atmosphere of a specific hall. In this case, the hall that we're using is the Sage Gateshead Hall 2. It's a beautiful hall, small hall, seats about 150, and has a beautiful kind of a wood room atmosphere. One thing that I forgot to mention in the last blog is that in addition to assigning all of the instruments to a location, you can also emulate the room tone. This is also commonly called the floor tone. It's basically a base level of noise that's generated within the room itself. So any acoustical environment will have a certain level of noise just from ambient sounds within the building. And the room tone is meant to emulate that. Some people may not like to use this. They may prefer to have an absolutely clean, pristine digital recording. But I kind of like adding this. To me, it adds a bit of realism, makes it sound more like a recording in a real space, because any space has a basic noise floor. So with that in mind, what we're going to do next is we're going to jump in and start to use Notion to record MIDI CC curves to control some of the various parameters within the VSL instruments. To do that, we need some means of inputting MIDI data into Notion. So I use the Nectar Panorama P1 as a control surface. Any other number of devices would suffice as well. You could use, for instance, a MIDI keyboard controller that has faders or knobs. You could use a PreSonus product, the fader port. That would work as well. But once you have those, you need a place to record the MIDI CC control data in Notion. And what you need to do is to set up sequencer staffs to record that data onto. The method for doing that is going to score setup in Notion. And we're going to create eventually 3 staffs for each instrument, but I'll show you how to create one at a time. You'll need to select where you want to add a new staff. We're going to add a staff for flute information. And then we're going to create a basic staff. That creates a staff, but it's not a sequencer staff, it's just a standard staff at this point. Go to Settings. We'll change the name to Flute Expression, EXP. Click to the Notation tab dialog box. Make it a single line staff. And this is essential. Click on the Sequencer Staff option. Hit OK. And that changes the appearance of the staff. It's now a single line staff. But more importantly, by identifying it as a sequencer staff, it's now ready to receive information to control CC parameters. Okay, I've got all of those now set up. There's 3 sequencer staffs for each instrument, each of them identified as expression, velocity crossfade, and slot crossfade in that order. You'll notice that in page view things get kind of wacky because there's way too many staves for a single page. So what I do at this point is usually switch to continuous view, and that way there's no limitation in terms of page size, and I can see all of this information in a single view. Let me zoom out, and there is all of the staves, the 8 instruments, plus 3 MIDI CC channel staves for each parameter that I want to record data for. So another important step, if you recall, when we created the Vienna Ensemble, we had to tell Notion to send this note data to the appropriate channel in the Vienna Ensemble player. Violin happened to be on Vienna Ensemble channel 3. Let's take a look at that, just to refresh your memory. So flute was channel 1, English horn channel 2, fiddle channel 3. So what we have to do is, very similarly to what we did with the Vienna Ensemble and the note information, we have to tell Notion that the MIDI data that it encounters on this staff gets fed to the Vienna Ensemble channel 3. And you do that by using the use instrument command. You show all instruments. You select the Vienna Ensemble. Use the drop down to select channel 3. Once you do that, the cursor will change, and then you can place that icon at the appropriate staff location on that staff. Now in this case, it's very easy because we want all 3 of these staffs to feed into Vienna Ensemble channel 3, which is the fiddle. So one thing you'll need to do before you start recording those CC change curves is to make certain that your VSL instruments are set up to receive them. Let's look at the fiddle, for instance. And you do this by changing some parameters in the control map tab. So typically when you first look at a VSL instrument, you often see the Perform tab up, and it has all these different sliders for setting the various parameters of the instrument. We want to automate that, and so you use a control map to tell the Vienna instrument which CC channel it's going to receive information on. So in this case, if you recall, I set expression to channel 20. It's currently set to 21, so I need to change that. To do that, you select the expression parameter, click the source button, and find the controller channel that you want to record information on. And that's channel 20 in this case. Channel 20 is going to feed data to the expression parameter of this instrument. Velocity crossfade, if you recall, I use CC21, and slot crossfade, I use CC42. So once you have those set, then this instrument is set to receive that information that you're going to record in the appropriate location and feeding the appropriate parameters of the instrument. This is very, very important. Once you have this done, you can use copy controller mappings by right-clicking on the control map, right-click, hit Copy Controller Mappings, and then you can click on another instrument and use Paste Controller Mappings to speed up the process of changing all of those settings. By the way, one other important setting to note here, in order to make playback sound correctly, is on the Perform tab in the Vienna instrument. You'll need to make certain that this Vel XF button is checked. That means that this instrument will recognize velocity crossfade and playback velocity crossfade appropriately and correctly. So now we're ready to record. We've got these MIDI CC staves set up. They're feeding into VSL Ensemble Channel 3. I'm going to select the Fiddle EXP or Expression stave. You have to select that first by clicking on it. It then is highlighted with this yellow-green bar, which means that that's currently the active staff. And then you can hit record and you can start recording. So the important thing here is that the staff is highlighted in green. So I'm going to hit the record button. You'll hear some music, and I'm going to start moving the slider on my Nectar Panorama P1. You can't see anything happening, but when I stop the recording, the MIDI CC curve appears. Each one of these is a MIDI CC control message. In this case, it's feeding control channel 20, and the value is 67. So you can continue doing that. Click on the velocity crossfade, hit Command R to start recording. Record some data there. Of course, this data that I'm recording is meaningless. I'm just moving the slider randomly. You will record intelligent data, and you'll move the sliders exactly how you want. It takes a little practice, since typically you can't hear the effect as you're recording. But once you get a little practice doing this, you'll understand where a PPP should be, or a P should be, or an F should be in terms of the slider position to give you the results that you want. So that's basically the process. You select the staff, record the data, and when it plays back, you'll hear the results of that. So here's the score, Robin is to the Greenwood Gone, with the 8 instruments, and this was an earlier iteration of this project, which had 2 MIDI CC channels recorded for each instrument, and these were expression and velocity crossfade. My workflow has since changed, and I've started using 3 CC channels, adding the slot crossfade parameter as well. But we're going to give this a listen in its older state, if you will. I'm in the process of re-recording this to incorporate the slot crossfade parameters as well. But let's give it a listen in its previous state, and I think you'll hear the effect of these MIDI CC control channels in the subtlety and the realism of the music. So that'll give you a sense of the power, I think, behind this kind of control, this kind of detailed control of what your instruments are doing. By the way, this can be used whether you're using Vienna instruments or some other instrument. This technique could be used with any instrument that responds to MIDI control data. Pretty much any other instrument, whether it's a contact instrument, an Embertone instrument, you name it. Pretty much any instrument that you use with Notion from any sample library can use this kind of data to control its parameters. Okay, that's it for this time. We'll talk to you later.